Alright, well, this morning I forgot to check my mic settings and it turned out to be way too soft. And I think at the end of the recording I kind of realized that. Um, but anyway, this is a redo, so if you got a lot of stuff out of the um, presentation this morning, you don't have to watch this one again. It's pretty much the same stuff. Anyway, this is going to be shorter because I won't be drawing these pictures as I talk, so it's going to be a little bit faster. So what you're seeing here, right here, on the whiteboard area, are all the components that go into CISW410. The only prerequisite of CISW410 is CISW300. So this link right here, actually I used the wrong tool. So this link right here is the only one link that does not require extra time in CISW410 as a class. So, as the name web scripting implies, there's scripting, which is basically programming. It's just called differently, but it really is programming. There's a class called CISP300, which is algorithm design and problem solving. It's a 3-unit class, but of the 3 units of this class, I would say at least 2 units need to come into CISW410. I apologize, I just had a itch that I had to scratch. I think there's a cat hair on my mic, so it's just touching my chin or the tip of my mouth a little bit. So anyway, in CISP 300, 2 units of those 3 units are actually needed in this class because we need to talk about variables, expressions, conditions, loops, if-then, basically conditional statements, subroutines, otherwise known as functions. And when we talk about functions, we also need to talk about parameters. And then the various types would also include objects, arrays, and then we need to talk a little bit about algorithms. Maybe something like sorting, finding the maximum, how to process an array, and so on. So of the 3 units here, I would say we need about 2 units of that. And then we have the networking side of web scripting. Now, strictly speaking, okay, when you're scripting to generate an HTML document, you really don't need to know a lot about all the networking stuff. However, in practice, you do. Because in practice, there are many considerations when it comes to HTTP that you really need to be aware of. So that includes what a GET request is, what a post request is, how do we embed parameters into both a GET or a post request, what are cookies, right? How do we maintain sessions, and so on. So all of those have to do with HTTP, or the Hypertext Transport Protocol, which is the language used by the HTTP client, which is a browser, and the HTTP server, which on the Power server is by default the Apache server. However, your script is actually acting as a server as well. So that's why it is kind of important to also handle or be able to understand the networking aspect of web scripting. And of course, when we talk about networking, there's also the IP address and the port number. And particularly, the port number is used very heavily in this class because we have multiple developers, basically multiple students, and also on the same computer. So we all have to kind of do our part so that our port numbers do not step on each other. So that's about, I would say, 0.5 to 1 unit of content from a CISN 300 class, the basic networking class. And then we have Linux, and we are using the command line interface. So it has several commands, and some of these are the most common commands that you encounter or you would use in Linux. ls is to show the content of a folder. mv is for renaming or actually moving a file from one folder to another folder. rm is for removing. cd is for change directory. And make dir is for making directory. Some of these you can probably do without using the CLI, you can use WinSCP for instance or FileZilla in order to do about the same thing, using a graphical user interface. But in reality, when you go work as a developer, as a web script developer, most of the time you actually do need to interact using a CLI because you don't know what kind of tools is being offered by your employer. So this is the most common denominator. I mean, every system is going to have the CLI available, and most servers, would let you sign into the CLI, and as a result, if you know how to operate using the CLI, there won't be a system, practically speaking, there won't be a system that you cannot work in, and I think that's a good thing. All right, so just from these various classes, we got 2 units here. Oh, by the way, I forgot about this one. This is SQL. Most scripts, most web apps or web scripts need to pull the data coming from some kind of a database server, and even though big data database is a thing now, most smaller websites, practically speaking, will still be using relational databases, which SQL is a language to communicate with. So SQL, which is structured query language, is a really kind of important part of this class too. There is a class called CISP350, which is Oracle Database, and it's a 4-unit class. Now, of those 4 units, I would say about 1.5 units is actually needed for us in this class. So we need to learn how to create a table, how to insert records into a table, how to update records in a table, how to delete records in a table, and most importantly, we need to know how to use a select statement so that we can filter and be able to operate, be able to use the join clause in a select statement so that we can actually get to the relational part of a relational database. So those are very important concepts, and at the same time they are not really programming concepts, and that's why there's no overlap between CISP 350 and CISP 300, because they really do not talk about the same thing. CISP 300 talks about what we call sequential logic, things that are done one step at a time. And then in CISP 350, it is more spatial. So for those of you who have taken linear algebra in college, it's kind of like that, okay? It's kind of like, it has more of a math taste to it compared to CISP 300. All right, so when you add up all of these units that are coming from other classes that we have to incorporate into this class, we got 2, 3.5, 4.5, 5 units. Okay, so we got 5 units of material that we need to cover in this class that are in varying degrees covered in other classes. But since I cannot make any assumptions about what classes people have taken other than HTML, which is CISW 300, we have at least 5 units of content to teach in this class, and that is already excluding everything related to the actual scripting language itself, the syntax of the scripting language. It doesn't really matter whether it's PHP or Node. We still have to go over the syntax of that particular scripting language. And then, I personally believe, debugging is very important, especially when the scripts, get more and more complicated. So what we are paying upfront to learn about debugging, learn how to use the inspector, learn how to set a breakpoint, learn how to examine the values of the variables and so on, that's all going to pay off later on, because without a good debugger and also technique to debug a program, some of the code that we have to write in this class is going to be very, very difficult to debug. Or basically, debug is a term to refer to finding out why a program is not working and then go fixing it. All right, so I hope this is not depressing, people, because it is a lot of material. So I basically just have to choose a level of depth to cover this, all this material. Not too deep, because otherwise, I would end up teaching basically like almost 10 units of material. So I kind of have to choose how deep to go in terms of these material and how much hands-on stuff I want you guys to do, because hands-on is very important in this class. All right, having said that, I'm going to go over my office hours because without a structured office hour, it's kind of hard for people to understand, when are you going to get back to me? When can I talk to you? When can I talk to you, over voice and so on and so forth. On Mondays and Wednesdays, my office hour is from 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, it is from 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. And then on Friday, it is from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. So it does cover various parts of the day, but on different days. And then the REC, which is I need to write the syllabus for this class, but I still haven't gotten the time to modify my existing syllabi, for this class because the usual classes that I teach are programming classes for transfer purposes. So the way those classes are taught and the way I assign grades for those classes is going to be different for this class. But anyway, REC stands for regular effective contact, and basically I have to give you a estimate of turnaround time. So for all of my classes, I have a policy of having a 24-hour for turnaround time. Once I get a question, I basically have about 24 hours to reply, and then over the weekend it's 48 hours. Now I know you guys are thinking, oh, this is an online class, okay? 24 hours seems to be a pretty long time. Well, that's only because we are so used to texting and social media where we can post something and then within seconds somebody's going to give you the thumbs up, and someone's going to like it and so on. But for a class, I cannot be on I'm not on social media, and I I would like to carve out time, just to um, answer the questions, within certain time slots in a day. So you probably will be looking at sometimes maybe hours at least, when before I can get back to you. Um, and I also need to sleep too, and because of other things that I need to do, I cannot go to bed too late. So 10 o'clock ish, I'm gonna have to go sleep. And even if you see my Discord having a green dot, I'm actually gonna go to sleep. Okay. And then I wake up fairly early in the morning, but I got kids that I need to send to school and stuff like that. So the bottom line is, please do not expect me to be able to get back to you within minutes or even within half an hour. Okay, because I try my best to allocate time to respond to Discord questions, but sometimes I just cannot get back, to Discord. Sometimes it's for hours because if I'm teaching some of my other classes, I may not even have an opportunity because I teach all my classes in synchronous mode except for this one. So if I'm teaching some other classes, I cannot have time to respond to your messages, through Discord. All right, so having all of this said, I'm going to kind of go over the concepts that we have talked about so far, and this time it's going to be a little bit fast, but since you have done some of the labs already, hopefully it is not going to be too fast. So hopefully this is going to be it's going to be okay as a review. So the first thing we do is I want to introduce this URL here, which is basically a web-based SSH client. So for those of you who have not installed PuTTY or found that it doesn't work for you in some situations, this is one really kind of quick and easy way to do it. And I spoke too soon. Okay, let me just check. That looks right to me. Okay, so let me just retype the whole thing by hand. Huh. It is still not found on the server. Well, I am going to show you how I'm going to debug this. Okay, find out what's wrong with my SSH server that's supposed to be a web client. Alright, so I'm going through my usual terminal inside my desktop computer or my laptop computer, and I'm going to use SSH. The SSH client is a command line command, and I'm going to sign in. Alright, so at least I can sign in. And now I'm changing to super user. Oh, I just entered the wrong password. There we go. Okay, still wrong. Okay, one more time. So su is a command on in Linux. So don't do this. Okay, this is just me illustrating some of the things that I have to do as a system administrator. So this is not something for you to do. Okay, I'm just showing you, some of the stuff that I have to do. And if you are managing a website, depending on how the responsibilities are carved out, you might even need to do some of this stuff, as a web developer, because you might end up also being a system administrator, at least partially. All right, so I'm going to look into a file that configures Apache, and I'm going to look for SSH, and that is in fact the correct endpoint. Oh, it's just SSH without the express. That's why. Okay, so I was mistaken because I thought there's an express before that, but there's no express before that. Okay, so now I know why it wasn't working, and just have to go back to the URL and fix that. There we go. And now we have our online terminal. So the nice thing about the online terminal is you can fire up as many instances as you want, just like PuTTY, except in this case you only need a browser. It can be Chrome, can be Firefox, can be Safari. So I'm going to sign in here. And just like I have talked about in my videos, I'm going to start up like a few of these instances because I'm going to use one to look at a file, use one to run it, and use another one to set up breakpoints and be able to inspect the program while it runs. So in this case, let me see if I can duplicate this tab. Yeah, so that is really cool. So I don't even have to type the URL. You can even bookmark it. I mean, it's kind of nice to be able to bookmark this URL, so this way you don't have to, like what I just did, okay, type in the wrong URL and it didn't work. So if you just bookmark it, that's a lot of convenience. Okay, so one more time, duplicate it one more time, duplicate like that. All right. All right, there we go. And now we're gonna use various commands. And the first thing I wanted to show is how you can use the man pages in Linux. In just about any Linux installation, you will have all the manual pages included to find out how to use specific commands. So the way you do it is on a command line, just type man, M-A-N, which stands for manual, and then you type the command that you want to learn. For instance, ls. Okay, so this is how ls is explained. Once you get here, if you want to learn how to use this is what we call a pager, because what it is doing is displaying a rich text file, and you can basically page up, page down, and scroll. So the easiest controls are page up, page down. So I'm paging down right now. It turns one page at a time. If you use the up down arrow keys, it will scroll one line at a time. If you type the slash key, it allows you to search on this page. So if you want to search for -a, then it will highlight all the things that has -a in it. And if you want to learn more, you can always look at this here. Press H for help. So just press H on your keyboard, and it will show you all the shortcut keys and whatnot to navigate within the man page itself. And this one you can also page up and page down. It's not a very long document, but nonetheless, there are still quite a few commands that you can kind of search through in order to find out what you can do here. Typically, most people just use page up, page down, and occasionally do the slash to search for things. But if you want to learn everything about how to use a man page, just type H. So when you're all done, you can type Q and that will get you out of the man page. So it's pretty. I think it's pretty useful, for people who want to learn how to learn by yourself. So you can man, cd, change directory, and that one doesn't have an entry because cd is actually not a command. Um, it's not here. It does have a page, but it's not here. I'm not sure about rm. Okay, so let's try a man rm. Yep, so that one does have an entry. And let's try Node itself. So even Node has a man page, and it even explains how to use inspect to start up a client. And if you look for dash dash inspect, it will also show you how to set up the debugger as a server when you start an app. So it's a pretty good resource. Okay, the man pages. So now we're going to use cd to go to express.debug. Basically, this is our so-called sandbox folder, which contains the program or the script that we are debugging and is not ready to be released yet. So in this class, obviously, releasing means it is ready for me to grade. So while you're still working on it, you want to use this particular folder. When you think you're ready for me to grade your script, then you move it into the production folder. So let me show you how to move or copy a script from your development folder into the production folder. So the terms debug, development, sandbox, beta, and test, they all mean about the same thing in this class. Basically that's the code that you are working on and is not quite ready to be released yet for me to grade. Alright, so how do you copy things around? So cp is the name of the command, and the best way to do it, if you don't want to risk anything, is to specify the full path. So instead of just saying copy app.js, because I'm in because the working directory is express.debug already. So if I just use the name app.js, it knows which app.js we are talking about, the one inside the current working directory. However, if you want to make your command basically foolproof to the point where it doesn't matter where you run it, then you can always apply the full path. So we'll copy app.js to the production folder, which is just your home folder / express. So that's going to copy the script over to the other side. Now, just because you copy the script doesn't mean the server, your production server, is utilizing this particular script. So we'll get back to that point in just a little bit. But right now, I want to show you, how to debug a script. Okay. So I may not have explained all the concepts, in a whole lot of detail. So this is my attempt to try to explain those concepts. And I am far more familiar with Vim or NVim. So I am going to use NVim when I use the editor. You can continue to use Nano. Nano is a very, I would say, a whole lot easier to learn compared to Vim. So you get to choose whatever editor you want to use. But my preference is Vim. Okay, and most people probably should start with Nano in this class. Alright, so now we are in here, and where's my syntax highlighting? It's not syntax highlighting for me, so let me just start it one more time. And there's still no syntax highlighting, and I think that might have to do with the terminal not being able to do that, because otherwise I probably should see colors over here, and I believe in the past it had color highlighting, and for some reason it's not doing it now, and it's already selecting color terminal. Alright, so let me try one thing. Reset the terminal. Nope, still no colors. Okay, well, I will figure out why that is the case, because I think Nano is not going to help in this case. Nano usually also has syntax highlighting. Oh, okay, got the wrong name here. So let's try Nano again. Nano app.js. Okay, so Nano does have syntax highlighting. It's just NVim that doesn't seem to get the syntax highlighting part. Oh, I know why. Because I forgot to specify syntax highlighting in this case. So that was my bad. Never mind. because there's a configuration file for Vim, to specify whether to turn on syntax highlighting or not. All right. So anyway, we're going to use nano just because the syntax highlighting does make the file a little bit easier to read. All right. So I'm just going to redo one of the experiments that we have done, but this time I'm going to explain a little bit more. So we're going to go to this line over here, and Control C is going to show you the location. So we are on line 14 right now, which is at the beginning of the definition of a function, also called a subroutine, depending on which programming language we're talking about. So this subroutine or this function has a name of test URL and has two parameters. So the first one is req, not reg, which stands for request, and the second one is res, which stands for response. So these two parameters have to be specified by the caller. Whoever is calling this subroutine will have to supply these two pieces of information. X in this case is what we call a local variable, which means X cannot be seen anywhere else in this program. This particular instance of X is only visible, or we call it the scope, is coming from this open brace all the way to this end brace over here. Console.log, that's just just putting out some output to the terminal. It's not exactly the terminal, but for our discussion here, we'll just say it is the terminal. And then res.write is response.write. So this is a method. You can look at it as a kind of funny function because it's a function that belongs to an object called res, and res is one of the parameters of this function. So res as an object being passed as a parameter has a method called write, which is basically a function, and that basically whatever you specify as the argument to write is going to become part of the content of the HTML document that is going to be replied to the HTTP client, which is basically a browser like Firefox on the other side. So of particular interest here is how we use the value of x. X is a variable. It has its own value. It is initialized to default in this case. So using the backtick symbol, okay, let me move the cursor to the point of interest here. So using this backtick symbol, we can specify a string just like using a double quote or single quote. However, in a double quoted string, anything within dollar open brace and the corresponding close brace, like this X over here, that is special because what it is going to do is it's actually going to evaluate the value of X, while this string is evaluated, and then on the fly, the value of X is going to be expanded. In this case, default is going to become the part from the dollar sign all the way to the close brace over here. So this is a really handy feature if you just want to embed certain things within a string, because whatever you put inside between the braces doesn't have to be a variable. It can be a complicated expression. It can be a function call, so that the return value of the function call is being used to become the content of the string that you are quote-unquote generating. When you're done, you have to call res.end in order to indicate that you are at the end of the response. So that will basically quote-unquote send the whole reply out back to the client. And we have another console log here, basically just so that we have we can print in the console in the terminal, that we are at the beginning and now we're at the end. So we're going to focus on test URL here. But the question is, who is going to call test URL? This is the other tricky part of programming in a web script. So in this case, test URL is specified right here. App.get is what we do in order to set up an endpoint. In this case, the first argument is the endpoint. So /test/ is the endpoint that we are specifying, which is at the end of the URL. And this is called a callback function. So test URL, which is what we discussed earlier, is a function. but it's called a callback function because normally, if no one is making any request to the server, test URL does not execute at all. It is only when there's a request to this specific endpoint, then Express as a framework is going to call this callback function, which is test URL. And it is Express who is going to specify the request object and also the response object. So at this point, when we are just specifying this as a callback function, we are not going to pass any arguments. All we have to do is to say, hey, Express, when somebody is trying to reach this particular endpoint, call this function, with the correct request and the correct response objects at the time. Okay, so that's a very brief explanation of how this program works. And let's go ahead and use the next one here to start the execution of the app. So when I use the word app, I'm really kind of loosely referring to a web script that is gonna run. Okay, so that's what I call an app. The term web script is, it keeps transitioning. Sometimes, in the good old days, people call this CGI, Common Gateway Interface. So they call it CGI programming or CGI scripting. And these days, people just call it web scripting or web development. And so the terms, keep changing. It's just the industry doing its thing. Because in the good old days, CGI is a very technical term. It has to do with the how a web server is doing its function, and these days, it's very different now. Okay, anyway, so right here we are going to start the script to run. Okay, so we are starting the app in this case. Now, I can see there are a few confusions, between PM2 and Node. So the idea is, if you use Node, okay, so if you just say node app.js, that will start up the app. Okay, so when you press enter, it seems like it's not doing anything. But if I go to the endpoint that we specified earlier, I cannot type today. It's late in the day, and this has to be the debug because the port number is 41320 in this case, and we have to specify the endpoint test and then the final slash like this, and then we press the enter key, and not surprisingly, it's going to print default as the string that was double quoted. And if we switch back to this terminal, you can see at the beginning of test URL and at the end of test URL, that's what the console log is going to do. Now, before people have access to a real useful debugger like the inspector in this case, this is the only tool people have in order to debug their program. They have to sprinkle console.log all over the place so that as the program runs, it will basically leave behind a trail of breadcrumbs, and then by backtracking, by looking at the breadcrumbs, people would use that to help them find out what is wrong in the execution of a program. But this is a very crude way of debugging a program. Okay, so we're going to introduce a better way to do this. All right, so now I'm going to talk about why we have PM2. Okay, so with this particular method, as long as Node is running, on this command line interface, your script will continue to run on this side. So I can refresh and it's still working. Okay, so that's good. However, if you ever close your SSH session, it's gonna stop. Okay, so I'm gonna illustrate that right now. So I'm gonna close the tab here, and if I am correct, this is gonna terminate the SSH session. So right there, and we say the page is asking you to confirm you want to leave. Information you have entered may not be saved. Yes, we are going to leave. All right, so now we're going to go back here and try to refresh, and it is still running. I'm guessing it will keep running for a while until the SSH box times out. And this is one difference between using the web type, the web-based SSH versus PuTTY. Because if you were using PuTTY, the PuTTY terminal is closing the PuTTY terminal will immediately terminate the node app running in that case. But if you're doing it this way, it doesn't seem to terminate it right away, which is going to be a problem. Because if it doesn't terminate right away and I do it again, so let me show you what the problem you might run into when it is not terminated like that. Alright, so I'm logging back in again using another session of SSH. So I'm going to go back to express.debug and I'm going to go back here to see whether it is still running. So this is one way to test whether you have your script or your app still running. But I'm going to show you another way to see whether your app is still running or not. You can use this command, netstat tlnp. We may not need all the options, but I'm going to do it like this. So when you look at this, this is the column. This is column 4. Okay, so when you look at column 4 and you see the port number that is corresponding to your app, which in this case is 41320, that means you have a running instance for that particular app. And in that case, what you need to do is you have to stop it. Okay, so because otherwise, if you try to run Node again, if you try to rerun your app, it's not going to do it. Let me show you what happens when you try to rerun your app when it is already running. So I'm going to say node app.js again, and this is when you get this error message because it's basically saying the port number 41320 is already in use because only one app can be using this port number at any particular time. So that means I'm kind of stuck right now running the existing version of the script. I can no longer make a change and then run the script in a different way anymore. So if you're in this situation, what do you do? Okay, so I'm going to teach you a slightly more advanced command. It is not dangerous because you are an end user, so you cannot really do a whole lot of harm using this particular command. Okay, so let me do the whole thing again. Netstat tlnp -tlnp and then press the enter key. Oh, that one is gone now. It's gone by itself. It just took a while before it goes away because right now, if I look in this the fourth column, I can no longer see 41320 anymore. So it's gone. And to double check, I go here and try to refresh this, and this time it says surface not available because the process has died. So eventually it does die, but in this case it took a while. You can probably time because this is all getting recorded, so you can probably time how many minutes it took in order for the process to die because I closed the tab in the browser. Okay, so if you do run into the problem that it's still running and you want it to go away right away, you can kill it. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that now. So we'll go run it as node again, and this time you can see that it's running. And we'll run netstat tlnp in a different terminal, and you can see how 41320 is here because I just started it over here. So what do you do if you just want to get rid of it? Okay, but you have closed the terminal already, so you cannot just Control C, because Control C is the other way to stop Node when your terminal is still up and running. So right here, I could type Control C on the keyboard and basically stop the app right away. But if you have closed the terminal, then you can no longer type Control C because there's no way to type Control C in order to stop that node. So what you do in this case is you look at this integer over here. That is called the process ID. It is an identifier that uniquely identifies the instance of running your app that is using this particular port number. So what you need to do is to do kill and then followed by the process number. So kill, in this case, 10493, and then press the enter key. And we will confirm that it is killed because on the other side it says terminated. Yeah, sounds like something from a movie. Alright, so this is extra tip, that I'm introducing in this particular lecture. Alright, so getting back to debugging, okay? So using console.log is not really the best way to debug a program because we have a better tool to do it. So the better tool that we can use is node and then followed by 2 dashes, inspect equals to, and then you can type localhost if you don't want to type 127.0.0.1, but then you still have to specify the port number here, which is 93, followed by the 2 digits that are specific to you. In my case, it is 20. And then you have to specify the name of the script, which is app.js. So when you start your script this way, it is not just starting the script. It will do that just like node space app.js, but at the same time it's going to start the debugger or the inspector server. So it doesn't really do anything normally. So it is a server. It just kind of sits around, wait for requests coming in. So now we will press the enter key, and it says is waiting on localhost 9320, and we can now go to the browser first, do a refresh, make sure that it's up and running. Okay, so it's up and running, and going back to the terminal, we will see the console log output as well. So this is all good, right? Now we want to say, well, but we want to debug the program, so we're going to set a breakpoint right before this res right here. So I'm gonna oh, come on. So I'm going to move the cursor all the way to this line here just to find out what line number we are on. Control C, it shows us this is on line 19. And then we go to the debugger. Oh, we haven't started the debugger client yet. So this is the debugger server. It basically enables debugging, but it is not the tool for you to interact with. So the tool for you to interact with is called the inspector client. So now we say node inspect. Yep, that's my cat, wanting to go outside. And then we specify the same thing, localhost colon 9320, and then press the enter key. And now we have connected to the server. What you're seeing on this screen is the inspector client, and what you're seeing on this screen is the inspector server. So now we have a client connected to a server, and the client is what we are going to use to interact with the program. So the first thing we do is we set a breakpoint on line 19. So if all goes well, it's going to tell you that the debugger is accepting your command, and it is now setting a breakpoint on line 19. So now let me re-emphasize one thing. We are not at the breakpoint right now. We specified a breakpoint. In other words, we put a stop sign on the street, but nobody is stopping at the stop sign because no one is walking on that street right now. Okay, so in order for someone to actually stop at the stop sign, we need to direct a person to walk on that street where the stop sign is, and that is done by re-triggering this particular endpoint, like so. And this time you can see how it is just pacing. So that means we have now reached the breakpoint. In the inspector client, it will say break in whatever program and on whatever line that the breakpoint is on. So now we actually have a person stopping at the stop sign. And at this point, we can use REPL so that we can actually interact with the program. First of all, we can show what X currently is, and then we will change X to become something else. So we can say just a test. Okay, and now we can continue the execution of the program. When you're in REPL, you cannot continue execution. You have to use Control C to get out of REPL first, and then you can use the command C, which is continue, in order to continue execution. So right now you're telling the person who has stopped at the stop sign to say, okay, you can now proceed. And when we get back to the server to the client, it now completes what was stopped or paused earlier, and now it prints just a test because we changed the local variable x to be just a test at this point. All right, so I think this pretty much reproduced everything that I talked about in the morning. Yeah, I think that is basically it. Um, I think in the morning I also spent a little bit more time on this picture over here, because it's really kind of important to understand that we are really compressing a lot of material into the time frame that we have, and that has always been the issue of this class. Um, Basically, the trade-off is I can make it. Okay, I'll put it this way. In the past, there are some instructors who would teach this class in a way where everybody feels great, everybody did well in the class, but when they walk out of the class, they kind of end up with some knowledge of web scripting, but not nearly enough to really to talk about in any job interview. Um, and what I try to do here is kind of to balance between the short time frame that we have, and also the depth of the content, because I really want everybody to be able to walk out of this class and go to an interview and be able to show that you are ready to become a web developer. Now that is really ambitious because, as you can see here, if in the ideal situation, okay, in the ideal situation, I would definitely recommend people to take all of these classes, CISW 300, and in the same semester take CISP 300, and then in the next semester take CISN 300, and then CISC 333, and then if possible, take CISP 350. That will give you all the background information. It will be the pieces. It will be the individual pieces that will be, and then CISW 410 will only be integrating all the knowledge that you have already learned from the other classes. So that way, CISW 410 can focus on just Node or PHP programming and the technique that we need to use when we are generating an HTML document based on the data coming out of a database, taking into consideration the networking aspect of it, knowing how to perform Linux CLI commands, because your Node programs, not so much the PHP program, but your Node program can run all this Linux CLI commands within your script. Okay, so if there's a command that can return a date that you want to show within your document, you can do that. So that is a very convenient feature, because now you can run just about any command you want to run as yourself when you are writing a Node script. Ideally, that is what I would like, okay, for someone to basically walk out and claim that I have a web developer certificate. That is the ideal case. Unfortunately, we are not in an ideal situation. So, but I do want to tell you guys, what I think of what I think of the context of this class, and also why I'm trying to kind of cram a little bit more material into this class than some people may feel comfortable with. So that is it. So tomorrow I probably will start a different video to talk about how to integrate SQL commands within your script. We'll start with something simple, and then we'll kind of move on to talk about something more complicated. And then at some point we'll have the requests to interact with the database. So we're just going to build up those connections gradually with our scripts. All right, well, hopefully this time the audio turns out better, and thank you.